I'm Abigail Carter, 78 years old, a woman, and my son and his wife called me a burden while I lay injured in the house I paid for. Not just a house, mind you. This was meant to be the culmination of a life's work, the safe harbor for my family, the place where my grandchildren would fill the halls with laughter long after I was gone. Instead, it became my prison, and the people I loved most became my jailers. But a spirit forged in the fires of a long life doesn't extinguish easily. Sometimes it just needs a reason to burn bright again. And Lord, did they give me a reason. My life with my late husband, Samuel, was not one of riches, but it was rich in spirit and hard work. He worked at the post office for 45 years, a man as reliable as the sunrise, and I worked as a school administrator, keeping generations of children and their teachers in line with a firm but fair hand. We saved, we sacrificed, we poured everything we had into our only child, our son Marcus. When Samuel passed on 10 years ago, he left me with a comfortable nest egg and a heart full of memories. We had always dreamed of a big family home, one where our son and his future family could live without the worries of a mortgage hanging over their heads. It was a dream we spoke of on quiet evenings, a legacy we wanted to leave behind. When Marcus married Tiffany, I was hopeful. She was sharp and ambitious, and I thought she would be the wind in his sails. Marcus had always been a gentle soul, more of a dreamer than a doer, and I believed Tiffany's drive would complement him. In the early days, she was all smiles and sweet words. "Oh, Mama Abigail," she'd say, "you have such wonderful taste." She'd admire my porcelain dolls, the ones I'd collected since I was a little girl, but her eyes never held the warmth of genuine interest. They held the cool, calculating glint of an appraiser. The first real crack in the facade appeared about a year after they were married. They were living in a small apartment, always complaining about the rent and the lack of space. One Sunday after church, Marcus brought it up. "Mom," he started, his eyes shifting toward Tiffany, who gave him a little nod, "we were thinking, you have all this space in your house and we're just throwing money away on rent." My house, the one Samuel and I had shared for 4 decades, was a modest but comfortable two-bedroom bungalow. It was filled with him, with us. The thought of changing it felt like a betrayal. "There's not much room here for a family, son," I said gently. "That's the thing," Tiffany jumped in, her voice smooth as butter. "We found this perfect place over in the new development. 4 bedrooms, a big yard for the kids when we have them. It's a dream home." "That sounds wonderful," I said, happy for them. "How are the finances?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Well, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. We can't quite get approved for the mortgage on our own, but with your savings. If you sold this house and put that money with your savings, we could buy it outright. No mortgage, and of course you'd have the master suite downstairs. We could all live together, one big, happy family." The dream Samuel and I had, they were serving it back to me on a silver platter, but something felt off. It was happening too fast. My husband had been gone only a few years, and they were already asking me to sell our memories. But then I looked at my son's hopeful face, the same face I had nursed through fevers and celebrated at graduations, and my heart softened. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted a legacy. So against the quiet warnings of my own intuition, I agreed. We sold my bungalow, the keeper of my most precious years, and I liquidated the investments Samuel had so carefully curated. I wrote a check that represented my entire life's work and handed it to my son. The house was put in his name. For tax purposes, Tiffany had explained with a quick, bright smile. "It's just simpler this way, Mama Abigail." I was 72 years old, and the idea of navigating complex legal papers was exhausting. I trusted them. "That was my second mistake." The second sign was subtler. It came in the form of my own furniture. When we moved into the new, sprawling house, I expected to see my familiar armchair in the living room, my cherrywood dining table in the dining room. Instead, my things were relegated to my downstairs suite. "We're going for a more modern aesthetic, Mama A," Tiffany said, gesturing around the vast, gray-painted living room filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine but offered no comfort. "Your things are beautiful, of course, classic, but they just don't fit the vibe." My life's collection of things didn't fit the vibe of the house I had paid for. I swallowed my pride and said nothing. I told myself it was a small sacrifice for family harmony. I was living with my son and soon my grandchildren. It would be worth it. When my Utter Maya was born, followed by my grandson, Leo. 2 years later, it felt like it was. Their laughter did fill the halls just as I had dreamed. They were my sunshine. I would read to them, bake cookies with them, and tell them stories about their grandfather. In those moments, the sterile, gray walls of the house felt warmer. But Tiffany's gratitude seemed to wane with each passing year. My presence became less of a cherished family connection and more of an accepted fixture, like a piece of old furniture that was too much trouble to move. The meals I cooked were often met with, "Oh, I'm on a new diet, Mama A," from Tiffany. The advice I offered Marcus about the garden was waved away. "Tiff has a landscaper she likes," he'd mumble, avoiding my eyes. I was the matriarch, the benefactor, the very foundation of their comfortable life, yet I was slowly being rendered invisible within my own home. My son, my sweet Marcus, seemed to shrink under his wife's authority, his filial devotion eroding under a constant barrage of her wants and needs. The we he used to share with me had become the we he now shared with her, and in there was increasingly little room for me. Life settled into a rhythm, a deceptive kind of peace that I now recognize as the quiet before a tempest. My days were structured around my grandchildren, Maya and Leo. They were my purpose, the sweet melody in a house that often felt silent and cold. My suite, as Tiffany called it, was my sanctuary. It consisted of a large bedroom, a sitting area, and an ensuite bathroom. Here, my old armchair sat proudly by the window, my cherrywood nightstand held a picture of Samuel, and my porcelain dolls watched over me from their glass cabinet. It was a pocket of my own history in a house that felt determined to erase it. My mornings would start early. I'd wake before the sun, the quiet of the house a comfort. I'd make my way to the large, modern kitchen, a space so sleek and metallic it felt more like a laboratory than a place for cooking. I'd make a pot of coffee and my oatmeal, and I'd sit at the cold marble island listening to the house wake up. The first sounds would be the children, their little feet pattering on the floor above. Soon after, Marcus would come down, grab a travel mug of coffee, give me a quick "morning, Mom," and be out the door to his job at a consulting firm. He was always busy, always rushing. The leisurely Sunday mornings we used to share over the newspaper were a distant memory. Tiffany would descend last, usually in expensive workout clothes, her phone already pressed to her ear. She'd nod at me, a gesture that was more of an acknowledgement of my existence than a greeting, and proceed to make a complicated green smoothie that whirred and buzzed, drowning out any chance of conversation. The children were my bridge to the family. Once they were up, I was grandma, a role I cherished. "Grandma, can you read me a story?" Maya would ask, climbing into my lap. "Grandma, can we make your special snickerdoodles today?" Leo would plead. These were the moments I lived for. For them, I would endure Tiffany's quiet dismissals and Marcus's growing distance. Yet the slights continued, small as paper cuts, but they bled all the same. There was the matter of the garden. I have always had a green thumb, a gift from my own mother. The new house had a large backyard, a blank canvas of grass. I had visions of a sprawling vegetable patch, of rose bushes like the ones Samuel used to grow for me. I drew up a little plan, bought some seeds, and presented it to Marcus one evening. He looked at the drawing, a flicker of his old self in his eyes. "This is great, Mom, just like the old house." But then Tiffany walked in. She glanced at my drawing and scoffed, a little puff of air through her nose. "A vegetable patch, Abigail, please, it'll look so messy. I told you I'm having a professional come in to design a proper patio and a minimalist Zen garden." She didn't look at me when she said it. She spoke to Marcus as if I were a child with a silly idea. Marcus folded my drawing and handed it back to me. "Tiffany has a vision for it, Mom," he said quietly, and the subject was closed. The next week, bulldozers arrived and tore up the yard. Then there was the issue of my friends. My church group, the women I had known for over 30 years, wanted to visit. They had been asking to see my beautiful new home. When I mentioned it to Tiffany, she frowned. "An entire church group here on a Saturday, but that's when I have my yoga instructor over. The house will be chaotic." I suggested another day. "Well, Sunday is our family day. It's just a lot of older people, Abigail. The minimalist aesthetic is very fragile." The implication was clear. My friends, like my furniture, were too old and out of place for her perfect world. I ended up meeting them at a local cafe, telling them the house was still being settled, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. Marcus was complicit in his silence. He saw these things happen. He saw the way Tiffany spoke to me, the way my contributions were brushed aside. He saw, but he did nothing. Once I tried to talk to him. I found him in the garage organizing his tools. Marcus, I began, my voice trembling slightly, is everything all right with us, it feels like. He wouldn't meet my eyes, he kept fussing with a set of wrenches. Everything's fine, Mom, Tiff is just, you know how she is. She likes things a certain way, it's just easier to go along. And easier for who, son? I asked. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke my heart. It was a mixture of guilt and exhaustion. For everyone, he sighed and turned back to his tools. It was a warning, don't rock the boat. The price of this beautiful house was silence. The price was compliance. The price was me, shrinking myself down day by day so I wouldn't take up too much space in their lives, in the very home that my own life had built. I told myself it was for the grandchildren. I told myself that a fractured peace was better than open war. I chose to believe in the calm, all the while knowing, deep in my bones, that a storm was gathering just over the horizon. The day it happened began like any other. It was a Tuesday in early October, the air just starting to carry the crisp promise of autumn. The leaves on the maple tree in the front yard were turning a brilliant shade of orange, a splash of vibrant life against the house's muted gray tones. Tiffany was at a spa day with her friends, something she did at least twice a month. Marcus was at work, and the children were at school. I had the house to myself, a rare and precious gift. The silence was a balm. I played some of Samuel's old jazz records, the sound of Louis Armstrong's trumpet filling the cavernous living room and making it feel for a moment like a home. I decided to bake a lemon pound cake, Leo's favorite. The recipe was my mother's, the page in my cookbook stained and soft from decades of use. I gathered the flour, the sugar, the butter, the familiar ritual of comfort to my hands and my heart. The kitchen floor, a gleaming expanse of polished concrete that Tiffany adored, was my nemesis. It was unforgivingly hard and, as I was about to discover, treacherously slick when wet. I didn't see the small puddle of water near the sink, likely condensation from the fancy ice dispenser she'd insisted on. My slipper, worn smooth on the bottom, hit the patch of water and my world tilted sideways. There was no time to react, no time to even cry out. One moment I was reaching for the vanilla extract, the next I was airborne, my body twisting in a clumsy, helpless arc. The landing was a sickening crack, a sound that seemed to come from deep inside me, followed by a wave of pain so white-hot and blinding that it stole my breath. I lay on the cold, hard floor, my left leg bent at an angle that was horribly, unnaturally wrong. The pain was an all-consuming entity. It radiated from my hip, a relentless, searing fire that seemed to burn all the way to my soul. I tried to call out, but my voice was a strangled gasp. The house was silent save for the cheerful notes of the jazz record still playing in the other room. I was alone, helpless, on the floor of a kitchen I didn't like, in a house that felt alien to me. I don't know how long I lay there. Time seemed to warp and stretch. I focused on breathing, on trying to push past the agony. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, I heard the sound of the garage door opening. It was late afternoon. The children would be home soon. I heard Maya's voice first. Grandma, we're home, did you make cake? Her little footsteps came running into the kitchen, then stopped abruptly. Mommy, she screamed. Grandma's on the floor. I must have been a frightful sight. Marcus and Tiffany rushed in, their faces a mask of shock. The details are a blur of pain and confusion. I remember Marcus's panicked face hovering over me, Tiffany on the phone, her voice sharp and efficient. I remember the paramedics, the careful way they lifted me, the ceiling spinning above my head. The ride in the ambulance was a jostling, agonizing ordeal. At the hospital, the diagnosis confirmed what the sound of the crack had already told me: a fractured hip, a bad one. The doctor, a kind man with gentle eyes, explained that I would need surgery, a pin, maybe a partial replacement. The recovery would be long and difficult. I would be bedridden for weeks and would need intensive physical therapy for months after that. She'll need round-the-clock care when she first gets home, the doctor told Marcus and Tiffany in the hallway, his voice low but audible from my room. She won't be able to put any weight on her leg at all. She'll need help with everything, getting to the bathroom, bathing, meals. I saw Tiffany's face through the doorway for a fleeting second before Reishi composed herself. I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance. It wasn't concern, it wasn't sympathy. It was the look of a woman whose perfectly curated life had just been saddled with a deeply inconvenient problem. Marcus, bless his heart, just looked overwhelmed, a ship lost in a storm. The surgery went well. They pinned my hip back together, a piece of metal now holding me in place, a permanent reminder of my fall. After a few days in the hospital, I was discharged. They sent me home with a walker, a pile of prescriptions, and a long list of instructions. As Marcus wheeled me into the house, my house, the smell of antiseptic clung to me. The children looked at me with wide, worried eyes. I tried to give them a reassuring smile, but the effort was too much. I was exhausted, in constant pain, and utterly dependent. They set me up in my downstairs suite. My comfortable bed became my world. The window looking out onto the Zen garden was my only view. For the first few days they tried, Marcus would bring me my meals, his face etched with worry. Tiffany would pop her head in, ask if I needed anything in a voice that was a little too bright, a little too forced, before disappearing for hours. But the novelty of their care, if you could even call it that, wore off with alarming speed. The burden I was about to become was no longer a future prospect. It was a present, demanding reality. And the fracture in my hip was nothing compared to the fracture that was about to break my family and my heart wide open. The first week back from the hospital was a fog of pain medication and fitful sleep. The second week was when the fog began to clear and I started to see the stark, ugly reality of my situation. My independence, the thing I had cherished most about myself my entire life, was gone. I was an infant again, reliant on others for the most basic of needs. And the people I had to rely on were growing tired of the job. The meals Marcus had once brought to me with a worried frown were now often left on a tray by the door, cold and congealed by the time I managed to work up the energy to reach for them. My requests for help to get to the bathroom were met with heavy sighs from Tiffany, as if I were deliberately planning my bodily functions to interrupt her schedule. She'd stand impatiently by the door, tapping her foot, making me feel rushed and ashamed. The house, once filled with the happy sounds of my grandchildren, became a source of torment. I could hear them playing upstairs, hear their laughter, but I couldn't join them. I was confined to my room, the four walls of my suite closing in on me. They were told Grandma needs her rest, which became a convenient excuse to keep them away, to keep my needs from interfering with the household routine. I felt like a ghost, a presence felt but not truly seen, my existence reduced to a series of inconvenient tasks on someone else's to-do list. The turning point, the moment the mask didn't just slip but was ripped clean off, came on a Thursday afternoon. It had been nearly 3 weeks since my fall. The constant dull ache in my hip was a companion I had grown grimly accustomed to, but today a sharp, parched thirst had settled in my throat. I had finished the glass of water on my nightstand hours ago, and no one had come to check on me. I could hear Tiffany in the kitchen just down the hall talking on the phone. Her voice was light and animated as she described a new handbag she'd seen online. I waited for her to finish her call. I waited another 10 minutes after that, not wanting to be a bother, but the thirst was becoming unbearable. Using my arms, I pushed myself up in bed, the movement sending a jolt of pain through my hip. I took a deep breath and called out, my voice weaker than I expected. "Tiffany, could you please bring me a glass of water?" There was silence for a moment. Then I heard her footsteps, quick and heavy, coming down the hall. She appeared in my doorway, her phone still in her hand, her face a thundercloud of irritation. She wasn't looking at me, but at her phone, thumbing through something. "What is it now, Abigail?" she asked, her tone sharp, impatient. "I'm just so thirsty," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Could I please have a glass of water?" She finally looked up from her phone, her eyes locking onto mine, and in them I saw no compassion, no kindness, only a deep, simmering resentment that seemed to have been waiting for this exact moment to boil over. She let out a short, sharp, ugly laugh. "A glass of water," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "I just sat down. I'm trying to handle my own life here. Do you know how much I have to do? Between the kids, the house, my charity board, my entire day is spent running around." She took a step into the room, her hands on her hips. "We are not your damn servants, Abigail. This isn't a hotel." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They suck. Ed the air from my lungs, leaving me breathless and dizzy. "We are not your damn servants." The cruelty of it, the sheer, unadulterated disrespect, was staggering. I looked past her down the hall, hoping to see Marcus, hoping he would come and stand up for me, his mother. And then I saw him. He was standing at the end of the hallway by the living room archway. He had been there the whole time. He had heard every word our eyes met. I saw a flash of shame, of cowardice in his gaze. This was his moment. This was the moment for my son, the boy I raised to be a good man, to step forward and defend his mother who lay broken and helpless in her bed. I pleaded with him with my eyes. Say something, Marcus, please. He looked from my face to Tiffany's angry one. He took a small step forward, then stopped. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked down at the floor, shuffled his feet, and then, without a single word, he turned and walked into the living room, leaving me alone to face his wife's wrath. His silence was louder than her shout. Her words were a knife, but his silence was the twisting of that knife deep in my heart. In that moment, everything I had believed about my family, about my son's love for me, shattered into a million pieces. They weren't just neglecting me, they resented me. I wasn't family to be cared for, I was a burden to be managed. A chore. The house I had bought, the security I had provided meant nothing. My love meant nothing. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I didn't have the strength to sob. Tiffany watched me, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She had won. She had asserted her dominance, and my own son had backed her play. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me alone with my thirst, my pain, and the devastating knowledge that I was utterly, completely alone in my own home. The days that followed that confrontation were the darkest of my life. The house became a tomb, and I was buried alive in it. The air, which had once crackled with Tiffany's resentment, now settled into a thick, oppressive silence. She avoided me completely. The trays of food were now left outside my door with a soft thud, a signal that my rations had been delivered. I never saw her face. Marcus, too, became a shadow. He would slip in and out of my room to change my trash or drop off mail, his eyes always averted, fixed on the floor, the wall, anywhere but on me. The guilt radiating from him was palpable, but it wasn't strong enough to make him speak, to make him apologize. His shame had built a wall between us that felt as insurmountable as the Grand Canyon. I was a prisoner in my own suite. The pain in my hip was a constant, throbbing reminder of my physical fragility, but it was nothing compared to the agony in my soul. I would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over in my mind. Tiffany's sneering face. "We are not your damn servants." And worse, far worse, Marcus's back as he walked away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the ultimate betrayal. My son had chosen, and he hadn't chosen me. Loneliness was a physical weight on my chest. I felt adrift, disconnected from the world. I missed my friends from church. I missed the idle chatter with the cashier at the grocery store. I missed the simple human connection that I had always taken for granted. My grandchildren were my only light, but even that light was being dimmed. Tiffany would bring them to my door for brief, supervised visits. "Just for 5 minutes," she'd say, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "Grandma is very tired." Maya and Leo would look at me with confusion, their youthful energy stifled by the tension in the room. They felt it too, they knew something was wrong. They would give me a quick, hesitant hug and be whisked away, leaving me in the suffocating silence once more. One evening, I overheard them. My door was slightly ajar and their voices drifted down the hall from the kitchen. They must have thought I was asleep. "Her physical therapy is going to cost a fortune," Tiffany said, her voice low and sharp. "And the copays for all these medications are adding up. Did you even look at the bills?" "I know, Tiff, I know," Marcus mumbled. "We'll manage." "Manage, Marcus? We have the trip to Italy planned for the spring. We have the country club membership. We can't just start hemorrhaging money because she was clumsy." A pause. "We need to look at our options. You need to look at the power of attorney paperwork we had drawn up. Maybe it's time to consolidate her accounts, make things more efficient." Power of attorney? I vaguely remembered signing a stack of papers when we bought the house. Tiffany had breezed through them, saying it was standard procedure in case I ever became unable to manage my own affairs. I had trusted her. I had signed where she pointed. The phrase "consolidate her accounts" sent a chill down my spine. That had nothing to do with the draft from the window. They weren't just talking about my care. They were talking about my money, my life savings, the nest egg Samuel and I had worked our whole lives to build. That night, sleep was impossible. The pain in my hip was a dull throb, but the fear in my heart was a raging fire. I was helpless. I was a financial burden they were actively plotting to manage. The love was gone, replaced by cold, hard calculation. I had given them everything, my home, my security, my life savings, and in return they had left me to wither away in a back room, waiting for me to become pliant enough or perhaps sick enough for them to take the rest. Staring into the darkness, a face surfaced in my mind, James Peterson. He lived 2 doors down in the same house he'd been in for 50 years. He had been Samuel's best friend, his fishing buddy. James was a retired accountant, a man as sharp as a tack even at 80 years old. He was a no-nonsense man, fiercely loyal and honest to a fault. After Samuel died, James would check on me every week without fail when I was in my old bungalow. Since I'd moved, I hadn't seen him as much. Life had gotten in the way. A sliver of hope, the first I had felt in weeks, pierced through my despair. I needed help, I needed an ally, I couldn't fight this alone. My cell phone was on my nightstand. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the movement sending sharp pains up my arm and into my hip. I ignored it. I found his number in my contacts, his name listed right below Samuel's, which I could never bring myself to delete. I pressed the call button, my heart pounding in my ears. It rang once, twice. Peterson, his voice answered, gruff and familiar. Tears sprang to my eyes, tears of relief this time. "James," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's Abigail, Abigail Carter." There was a pause on the other end. "Abby, is that you? You sound awful. Is everything all right?" And with that simple question, with that small kernel of genuine concern, the dam broke. I began to cry, not the silent, mournful tears of before, but deep, ragged sobs of a woman who had finally reached her breaking point. "No, James," I wept into the phone. "Nothing is all right. I need your help." The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I heard Tiffany's annoyed footsteps, then her voice tight with suspicion. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Abigail Carter," came James Peterson's firm, unwavering voice. "She's expecting me." A moment later, James appeared in my doorway. He was just as I remembered him, tall and lean, with a full head of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene in one sweeping glance, the tray with yesterday's untouched lunch, the sterile feel of the room, and me looking small and frail in the large bed. His face, etched with the lines of a long life, hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Abby," he said, his voice soft as he walked over and took my hand. His hand was warm and strong. "What in God's name have they done to you?" He pulled up the small visitor's chair, his gaze never leaving my face, and for the next hour I told him everything. I told him about the house, the dismissive comments, the fall, and the cold, polished concrete floor. My voice broke when I recounted Tiffany's cruel words and Marcus's silent betrayal. I told him about the overheard conversation, the talk of power of attorney and consolidating accounts. I laid bare the entire ugly story, the shame and heartbreak pouring out of me. James listened without interruption. He just sat there holding my hand, his jaw tightening with every word I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes blazing with a righteous anger that warmed my soul. He wasn't just my late husband's friend, he was my champion. "The cowards," he finally said, his voice a low growl, "to do this to you, after everything you've given them." He patted my hand gently. "All right, Abby, the pity party is over. From this moment on, we fight back." His words were like a splash of cold water. Fight back? The idea seemed impossible. I was weak, bedridden. "How, James?" I whispered. "I can't even walk to the kitchen." "Your body might be weak, but your mind is sharp. And my mind," he said with a wry smile, "is a steel trap for numbers and legal nonsense. They want to talk about finances? Fine, we'll talk about finances." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "First things first, that power of attorney, do you have a copy of what you signed?" I shook my head. "It's all in a file in the office upstairs. Tiffany handles all the paperwork." "Of course she does," he muttered. "Okay, step 1 is to get our hands on that file. Step 2 is to get you a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a real bulldog. My niece Clara, she's one of the sharpest estate lawyers in the city. She eats people like your daughter-in-law for breakfast." For the first time in a month, I felt a flicker of scent. Strength return. James's presence, his clarity, his anger on my behalf, was the antidote to the poison of despair that had been slowly killing me. He made me see the situation not as a personal failing or a family drama I had to endure, but as a calculated exploitation that I had to end. They think you're a frail old woman they can steamroll, James continued, his eyes glinting. We're going to let them keep thinking that right up until the moment we pull the rug out from under them. We're going to get you healthy and we're going to get you your house back. Our plan began to take shape right there in my little room. James would be my legs and my muscle. He came back the next day with a container of his wife's famous chicken soup and a mission. While I ate the first real hot meal I'd had in weeks, he waited for Marcus and Tiffany to leave for one of their son's soccer games. The moment the car pulled out of the driveway, he slipped upstairs to the office. He was back in 5 minutes, a thick file folder in his hand. Got it, he said, a grim smile on his face. Let's see what we're dealing with. We spread the documents out on my bed. My signature was on every page, a loopy, trusting script that made my stomach churn. James, the retired accountant, put on his reading glasses and went to work. He scanned the power of attorney document, his lips a thin, tight line. This is a durable power of attorney, Abby, he said, his voice grim. It gives them broad powers over your finances, effective immediately, not just if you become incapacitated. They could have started using this the day you signed it. My blood ran cold. The conversation I'd overheard took on a more sinister meaning. They weren't just planning to take control, they might already have it. This is bad, James. It's just paper, he said, his confidence unwavering. And paper can be undone. First thing Monday, I'm calling Clara. She'll file a revocation of this POA immediately. That'll freeze them out. Then she'll help us with the next step. What's the next step? I asked, my heart pounding. James looked me square in the eye, his expression one of absolute resolve. The eviction notice, he said. This is your house, Abigail. It's time to clean it out. The words were terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Kicking out my own son, it was unthinkable. But living like this as a prisoner in my own home was even more so. James saw the conflict in my face. This isn't your son anymore, Abby, he said gently but firmly. Not the boy you raised. He made his choice when he walked away and left you thirsty. Now you have to make yours. He was right. I had been grieving the loss of a son who had, in essence, already left me. The Marcus I loved would never have stood by and allowed this to happen. I was clinging to a ghost. With James by my side, I found the courage to let that ghost go. I nodded, a single decisive movement. Okay, I said, my voice clear and steady. Let's do it. The alliance was forged and the plan was set in motion. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They were about to find out how wrong they were. With James's niece, Clara, on board, things moved with astonishing speed. Clara was everything James had promised, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s with an air of absolute competence. Our first meeting was a video call from my bed. She listened to my story with a sympathetic but professional focus, her eyes narrowing when I recounted the financial conversation I had overheard. The first thing we do is revoke that power of attorney, she stated, not asked. I'll have the paperwork couriered over for your signature this afternoon and filed by morning. That will cut off their access immediately. Next, she explained the eviction process. Since they were family and not tenants with a lease, the process was slightly different, but the outcome was the same. It's your name on the deed, Abigail. The money was yours. We have the bank records to prove the entire purchase was funded by you. Morally and legally, this is your home. They have no claim to it. The eviction notice was drawn up. It gave them 30 days to vacate the premises. The day James served it to them was a day I will never forget. I was in my room, but I heard the whole thing. He rang the bell and Marcus answered. This is for you, James said, his voice calm and level as he handed Marcus the envelope. There was a moment of silence. I heard the tearing of paper. What is this? Marcus asked, his voice shaking. An eviction notice? Is this a joke? Does Abigail look like she's joking? James's voice was ice. You have 30 days to leave her property. Any attempt to contact her, harass her, or touch her finances will be met with immediate legal action. You would be wise to contact a lawyer. Tiffany's shriek echoed down the hall. You can't do this. This is our house. That old woman can't just throw us out. And it was never your house, Mr. S. Vance, James replied coolly. It was always hers. You were just guests, and you have worn out your welcome. He turned and walked away, the sound of the front door closing behind him like a judge's gavel. The next 30 days were a cold war. The house was thick with their silent fury. They hired a lawyer, of course, who sent a blustering letter to Clara, a letter Clara dismissed as the last gasps of the desperate. They tried to get to me knocking on my locked bedroom door. "Mom, please," Marcus begged one night, "we can talk about this." But I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. With daily visits from a physical therapist arranged by James, I was slowly regaining my strength. I could get from my bed to my chair on my own now, and with a walker, I could make it to my bathroom. Every small step was a victory, a reclamation of myself. The moving day arrived, a gray, drizzly Saturday. A large moving truck was parked in the driveway I had paid for. I sat in my armchair by the window, watching as two movers they had hired began loading boxes. Marcus and Tiffany were directing them, their faces grim and resentful. They threw me hateful glances through the window, but I met their glares with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Halfway through the move, as the house began to empty and echo, a strange compulsion came over me. I needed to see their room one last time. It felt important. Leaning heavily on my walker, I made my way slowly out of my suite and down the hall. The house felt vast and empty without their clutter. I made my way up the stairs, one painful step at a time, my hips screaming in protest. It was the first time I had been upstairs since my fall. Their master bedroom was in chaos. Boxes were everywhere, clothes were strewn across the floor. The movers were taking the large dresser out. As they angled it through the doorway, a box that had been hidden behind it toppled over, spilling its contents onto the carpet. It was a simple cardboard document box. Tiffany rushed over. "Just leave it, I'll get it," she snapped at the movers. Her panic set off an alarm in my head. While she was distracted, yelling at Marcus in the hallway, I used my walker to nudge a file folder that had slid out of the box. The tab on it was labeled AC Finances Private. My finances, private. My heart hammered against my ribs. With trembling hands, I bent down, an excruciating effort, and picked it up. I tucked it inside my housecoat and slowly, carefully made my way back downstairs to the safety of my room, locking the door behind me. I sat on my bed, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a copy of the power of attorney I had signed, but behind it were documents I had never seen before, bank statements, statements from an online bank I had never heard of in an account under both of their names, and then I saw the transfers. Starting almost 2 years ago, just after my granddaughter Maya turned 5. A regular monthly transfer, $2,000. It was coming from an account I didn't recognize. I dug through the rest of the folder and found statements for my own pension fund. And there it was. A monthly withdrawal authorization for $2,000 made out to a holding company I didn't know. The signature on the bottom was a near-perfect forgery of my own. They had been stealing from me for 2 years. They had been siphoning money directly from my pension, the money I had set aside for my long-term care for my final years. $48,000 gone. They had been bleeding me dry while smiling to my face, while living in my house, eating my food, the trip to Italy, the country club membership. I had paid for it all unknowingly. The cruelty, the sheer premeditated deceit of it all was breathtaking. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just neglect. This was theft. This was a long, calculated con against a trusting old woman, their own mother. When the last box was loaded and the truck was ready to leave, Marcus knocked on my door one last time. "Mom, we're going." I took a deep breath, clutching the folder, and unlocked the door. I opened it and stood there, leaning on my walker, blocking the doorway. I looked at my son, at the man he had become, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear resolve. I held up the folder. "I found this," I said, my voice as steady as steel. The color drained from his face. Tiffany, standing behind him, saw the folder and her eyes widened in horror. $2,000 a month, Marcus," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "For 2 years, you stole from me. You stole your own mother's retirement money to fund your pathetic, shallow life." Marcus stammered, "Mom, it's not. We were just managing it for you." "Don't you dare lie to me," I cut him off, my voice rising with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Not anymore. You stood by and let this woman call me a servant in my own home, you. Let her neglect me while I lay in pain. All the while you were both picking my pocket like common thieves. You didn't just break my hip, you broke my heart, you tried to break my spirit, but you failed. I looked past him to Tiffany, whose face was a mask of pure hatred. Get out of my house, I said to her. Then I turned my eyes back to my son. I saw the little boy I had raised, now a hollowed-out man, and I delivered the final blow. And you, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, you are no longer my son. I stepped back, closed the door in their stunned faces, and locked it. I stood there listening as they finally walked away. I heard the front door close for the last time, and then there was silence, a true, peaceful silence. It was the sound of my life, my home, my dignity being returned to me. A closing monologue. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet sort of grace. James and his wife helped me rearrange the furniture, bringing my familiar armchair and my cherrywood table out of my suite and into the main living room. We opened the windows and let the fresh air chase out the ghosts of resentment. The house is still big, still gray, but it's slowly starting to feel like mine again. Clara, my lawyer, is handling the financial matter. She calls it asset recovery. I call it justice. I learned a hard lesson at 78 years old. I learned that love and biology are not always the same thing. I learned that giving everything you have to your children doesn't guarantee their love or their respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to draw a line, to say no more. My mistake was not in my generosity, but in my silence. I allowed my kindness to be mistaken for weakness for far too long. I let them shrink me down until I almost disappeared. But I'm still here. My hip is healing and my heart, while scarred, is healing too. I have my home, I have my friends, I have my self-respect. Some days I miss the idea of my son, the boy I once knew, and I ache for my grandchildren who are the innocent victims in all of this. But I know that I cannot build a future with people who tried to steal my past. My legacy won't be a house filled with ungrateful people. It will be the story of a woman who, when pushed to the brink, remembered her own strength and took her life back.